when there have been so many changes in the last 5 years. So traditionally we've had, let's say, 3 boxes, and of course this pyramid has, you know, your small MB, your medium businesses, and your large businesses that are catered by out-of-the-box software, mid-market software, and then your bigger box software with the incredible depth of structure. So a little bit about how each of these 3 levels have changed is, first of all, we've seen absolutely huge increases in functionality. We've seen a lot of changes such that we're no longer dealing with IT and finance projects. We're dealing with software that is much more integrated and tightly knit and touches most aspects of the organization. So we're dealing with business transformation software, even at the smaller end of the scope. So out-of-the-box software, some characteristics and changes that we've seen. First of all, it tends to be a lot more agile. We've got the established players like QuickBooks and MYOB, but we've got a lot of newer entrants to market like Xero, J-Curve, Fathom, FreshBooks. And what they've done is a lot of them have been very quick and rapid to add functionality, to move to cloud-based and subscription-based. They've enabled mobile access for very small companies, and they're very friendly for people who are non-accountants. And some of the platforms have been developed so that they integrate into some of the mid-tier products. For example, J-Curve and NetSuite are built on the same product on the same platform, with the idea that as you graduate from one, you can move from a small out-of-the-box solution to a mid-tier solution. And this isn't just exclusive to J-Curve and NetSuite. A number of companies have done it. For example, SAP and Concur and Sage and Microsoft Dynamics.
So Vittoria, I think a key point you sort of maybe just bounced over there is that the extension of the functionality from outside of the accounting team into much broader business process management as opposed to financial management or supply chain management, those sort of siloed views, is that is a significant trend, really, isn't it, in getting these systems used much wider across the business? Is that something that you've seen, and I guess it's a bit of a theme of what we're talking about today, is that wider engagement?
You'll see that come up in a couple of points in my presentation in my next slide, where I deal with trends and also in the approach, because it's one of the biggest things that has impacted the approach that I've seen taken and that I've taken when selecting software.
And you've got a little bit of a divide here, the on-premise versus software as a service, and these new cloud applications versus the more traditional stack. But I guess, you know, we've all seen the responses from the traditional vendors as they push their solutions across into the web and mobile world. Are we going to see emerging in just a single, set, and how long is that going to take, do you think?
I don't think we are. I think that they're offering both solutions. When I get to my trend slide, again, you'll see that one of the trends deals with both on-site, premise, and cloud and hybrid versions of that. I've got a couple of more points to make on this slide, and then I will move on to my trends if you don't mind.
Yeah, look, I'm interjecting. I'm interested. Carry on.
That's all right, because they're all pertinent questions, and they're coming up next in my presentation. But I just wanted to go over the changes that we've seen in software. So I've talked about the agility of out-of-the-box software that's enabling us to stretch it, but that's also bringing some of the functionality that was typically reserved for mid-tier companies and larger companies to the smaller companies, giving them a competitive advantage. The big box software has traditionally been characterized by very rigid structures, but also incredibly powerful, but requiring significant customization within that structure to offer that functionality. And what we've seen happen here is that some of these really large enterprise solutions have done 2 things. One, they've moved into the mid-tier range by developing or purchasing other software to incorporate into their suite of software. And also they've moved from offering a suite of software to offering a la carte products. So not having to deal with that big architecture that you would typically find in some of these top tier companies that requires a lot of customization. You might want the functionality, but you're not quite ready for it. So they're offering light versions or smaller versions that are not as upfront intensive to develop. In the mid-market companies, one of the trends we've seen with mid-market companies is that they are more agile than the big systems that require a lot of structure, but the big thing with them is that they've specialized, and a lot of them have open source code. So what's happened here with specialization, you'll see that some specialize in manufacturing or distribution, and they are developing really deep functionality in these areas. The other thing is open source code. So that is within the software ERP, CRM, but also within applications like Soligo and different apps that you find on the internet. They're saying, look, our source code is open to everyone, and please integrate to increase the depth of functionality. So what you're seeing is expansion of these software programs, extension of the capabilities, so that you, when you're making a selection, you can grow into the next level, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah, it's a big thing to understand when you're making the selection is how active that ecosystem and community is around the software. I mean, some of those plugins are really, those add-on type solutions are really make a big difference to how well the solution is received, or specifically addressing your industry vertical solution. So yeah, it's something to consider when you're going into it, is having a look at that community surrounding each piece of software.
Yeah, and one example of that, I'll jump to the last bullet point in my trends, and that's social intelligence gets even smarter. And we all know that systems right now can track conversations. There's Outlook integration, but systems right now with these apps, you can add social media icons into Gmail, and Gmail has said, look, here's a code, please integrate with your software so that it's seamless, and you can divide personal emails between business emails, and all the business emails tagged to the client, and then you can mark it by keywords. It's absolutely amazing what you can do to enable a company to be more nimble and responsive to customer needs and desires, and that's a huge trend in 2015.
Yeah.
Other trends are that mix of that hybrid cloud, that mix of private cloud and in-house. So about 5-6 years ago, big trend was, oh, let's all move to the cloud. It's more mobile. There'll be huge cost savings. And there's been a move to a hybrid where companies are saying, we haven't realized the cost savings, or we have concerns about control. And it's arguably less costs, not always. So they're being more selective in what moves to the cloud. For example, some data might work on-premise, but then they might get a software ERP that's cloud-based that allows for that data storage and great access to mobile workforce. Another trend, subscription pricing for enterprise software. And this is being offered at all levels, but you'll especially see it with the out-of-the-box software. That there's a move from that upfront and preload cost model to an operating cost model, and shifting costs to on a per user basis. And what that's doing as well, that's enabling much smaller companies without the big upfront investment in hardware or modules to have a lot of the same functionality that we see in the mid-tier and larger companies with a monthly subscription fee.
Yeah, look, that's not just small companies and taking advantage of that. The CIO at National Australia Bank just a couple of weeks ago at the CBIT conference in Sydney said, vendors, if you come to me and put a upfront capex spend in your licensing model, then we can finish the conversation very quickly. His expectation is that everything is moving to that model, that subscription, monthly number of users, flexible up down, sort of on demand is certainly where his expectation is at.
Yeah, and it also frees up cash flow for investment in other projects.
Yeah, did right.
Coming from an accountant's perspective.
This is from a CFO's perspective, so you're allowed to be a little bit of an accountant, Vittoria, just not too much.
So another trend, mobile apps. So the iPad turns 5 this year, but a lot of the software you'd access from your phone or from your iPad, but you'd get a really wonky screen. Well, there's been a big move, and it continues to be a trend to when you're accessing to have that dashboard actually right-sized for your iPad and your phone to make better use of it. In-memory computing is gaining ground, and that is relying on keeping the data in your random access memory in your desktop as a means of faster processing speeds. So what it's doing is enabling data analytics without grinding your system to a complete halt. And you're getting real time versus overnight updates. You're able to access information in the system, and it's a move from BI tools to dashboards, which is considered much more user-friendly. I guess my favorite trend would be the deeper ERP integration, and I have to be an accountant on this one, but it increases your versatility. And with procurement, HR, customer service modules, you've got one database, one version of the truth, and there's absolutely huge value in eliminating that distinction between the front and back end processes and streamlining, leveraging better customer support, and getting your product to market quicker. But here's where the accountant in me comes in. When you've got one database where you are keeping your information, your customer statistics, your figures, you absolutely, the opportunity for reporting and analytics is amplified. And for me, a huge benefit of a system is not only what are you tracking and how is it operating, but what can you get out of the system and how easy can you get that information out. And deeper ERP integration between CRM and ERP makes that possible.
Yeah, I think one of the questions that came in the registration process was the extent to which your new system, consideration of legacy systems versus integration with new systems, and to the, factoring that in is always going to be, particularly, I guess, in larger enterprise environments, something that weighs into the decision. And these open systems that have lots of integration points, simple ways to exit out of the core programming routine and go off to another system. It's certainly a factor to be weighed into your decision and selection.
It is, and it's the difference between. I'll draw from my architecture and design background because I took a curious route to accounting, but I equate it to the difference between remodeling and building something new. When you remodel, you've got constraints, you've got limitations of existing architecture on flexibility of your plan, scalability, and it's not always cheaper to do the remodel or stitching together new systems because you've got issues with programming language. You're generally dealing with more than one database, and when you deal with more than one database, you've got API connectivity issues, you've got maybe master-slave relationship between the two databases, and there's always the possibility for duplicate data if the data is sufficiently different that it's not picked up on. There's customization, and customizations they tend not to be upgraded when a system upgrades, be it a SaaS solution where you get pushed upgrades or your own solution on site. So there's a lot of workaround required sometimes when you're departing from best practice functionality if you're stitching systems together. And I think that needs to be considered when you are trying to stitch systems together. That it's not always the cheaper option.
Okay, now the timekeeper in me is going to have to pipe up now because we're 20 minutes into it, and we need to just press on through your other slides. Yeah. It's all my fault, of course, but over to you.
Moving on, but you can see these trends are all moving towards increasing the functionality. And I thought I'd balance that out by looking at a KPMG report that says the top ways businesses are using this functionality. And it's clear, I mean, these add up to a lot more than 100, so people were able to select a number of them, and driving cost efficiencies, enabling the mobile workforce, improving alignment, etc. I look at these and I see that companies are still looking at software as a cost versus an enabler, because, well, you should forget what it costs and focus on the opportunities. You're more likely to be congratulated on delivering value beyond the expectations than spending 8% less than what was budgeted, because a year from now people are going to forget that you came in slightly under your budget, but they're going to have the system there and they'll either be complaining that it doesn't meet the functionality, or that it's an excellent system that has enabled them to increase sales, go out there and get customers that they didn't have. And I look at this slide and I'm actually astounded that 49% of businesses wanted to drive cost efficiencies, but only 35% of those were interested in better leveraging their data to provide insight. Well, how are they going to get those cost efficiencies without that data? And 30% are looking at developing new business models. And I think with all of the technology that's out there, all of the improvements that have been made, the new ways that we can go out there, capture business and data, why are we doing business the same way? So to me, this slide shows that a lot of companies are underutilizing their software, and in the presentation I'm going to offer you some tips on how not to be one of those companies. So we're going to look at 9 tips, and I won't read them all, or I won't state them all. I know you can read, but you'll notice that I've highlighted point 4, which is start looking at systems. A lot of people put that up at number 1, and I think there's a lot you have to do before you actually start looking at systems. You need to include both upper management and functional experts, because you need to know what is driving you to get that new system. You need to understand your business, and in order to understand your business, you can be the smartest person out there, but you are not going to have that in-depth knowledge of what's going on in the sales team, marketing, warehouse operations. If you do, I'd really like to speak to you. But you need to have support on a number of levels. The project sponsor is going to be that person that is passionate, who has the political power and the position power to keep the project going and funded. And they also have to be passionate, because during this period of selection and implementation and post-go live, it's not 3 months. It's a much longer period, and there's other things that could crop up, and you need someone who's going to help you not keep this project in the forefront, because we're dealing with a business transformation. Senior departmental managers, these are the people who, from the different subsidiaries or the different departments, are going to give you that high-level support, but they're also going to be working with the functional managers who are going to be able to contribute a lot more information that perhaps being finance or IT you didn't think about, and that are going to increase the depth of the solution that you put forth when you get to implementing. And it's absolutely critical that you get feedback on what it is people are looking for before you start looking for a system. The first 3 points in knowing your business, knowing what's driving you to a new system, bottlenecks, inefficiencies, constraints to growth, frustrations, all things that cost your bottom line business, you need to know what it is that you are looking for before you go look for that new systems. And my suggestion here is have interviews with people from the different departments and the functional experts and document it. Put it in a business overview and a gap analysis, and include both of the current frustrations and issues, as well as a 5-year plan to take a look at what opportunities you need to capture. And one owner, fabulous medical devices distributor that I'm currently working with, he said that on presentation of this business overview and gap analysis, that he felt physically sick at the end of this presentation at all of the money he realized he was losing due to wasted time and constraints and resources that he was allocating on pushing paper that could be otherwise deployed to more value-add jobs if he had the system to do it with. What this also did, sorry, Hayden, I know you're about to say something. It changed his mindset.
No, I was just thinking that the process can be torturous from many angles. It can be expensive and feel as if you don't get anywhere. But insights like that is you go through the process and you realize what you've been missing out on. I think it's very much worth the investment when you've made the decision to go through it. It's a recurring theme, I guess, of really understand what your problem is today before you try and do anything about it.
It really is, because if it takes 2 days to collect up all of the invoices, put them on an Excel spreadsheet, even if you're exporting from a system, and massage the data so that you can figure out what your GP was by product line, you're not going to be doing it very often. But if you can have that at the snap of a button, you realize, wow, I can make some really good business decisions, and I can be proactive rather than reactive. And what outlining all of this information does is it creates a roadmap, but it also, when you start to document these cost savings, it really shifts the mindset from, wow, this is a big expense, to this is an investment, so we can create some opportunities that are going to allow us to grow faster than our competitors. And that's exactly what you're doing here by knowing your business.
Just one thing there, Vittoria, and I guess a little surprised that you didn't have on that list the business case, but is a business case one of the deliverables out of that process? I mean, I think business cases have moved on from being financial justification to a proper sort of planning tool that informs the project delivery. But what's your perspective on the business case exercise?
To me, not much different from a business overview and gap analysis, because that is making the case for new software. I'm looking at it from the point of view of not justifying the expense, but taking a look at what are the gaps between where we are and where we want to be. It just frames your mindset from a case for a cost to stating what we need to do to capitalize on opportunities.
Yeah, right.
So when considering IT infrastructure, you've got to consider that companies have invested a lot of money on their infrastructure, and if they've got a decent infrastructure, there's going to be some reluctance to write that down, and there has to be a decision to either replace it all or to integrate existing systems, and this is where I spoke about before, the stitch together and remodel versus try to integrate, so I won't rehash that point. But companies also have issues with control, costs, when moving to the internet, data location and privacy laws, because the biggest data warehouses, data warehouses are in the U.S., but there is significant growth in that smaller market with local alternatives, so that you've got local privacy laws, and that was my attempt at some humor. The FBI hasn't been here after what happened at Google and some of the high-profile, you can say, security breaches.
I think the humor is in watch very closely for removal of this sign.
Yeah. So, but I think you also have to be cognizant that if you're moving to a cloud-based structure, you need access to quality internet. Because if you're out somewhere where broadband hasn't been rolled out or the internet's a little shoddy, when you're in a cloud-based structure, all of you, not just your mobile workforce, is accessing something that's off-site. And if your internet is not fantastic, it will slow your system down. So you really need to be aware of that as well. So we finally get to start looking at systems, and this is where you look at the IT infrastructure, you look at the gap analysis and business overview, you take a look at your growth plans and what is constraining that growth, and that should narrow it down to 3 to 5 solutions, especially in the mid-tier where companies have specialized. So if you know your business, in your distribution business, there are going to be software solutions out there that are more specialized to the distribution business. And by the time you've done all of this planning and research, you don't have 30 solutions to choose from anymore. And another reason to choose 5, you'll see in my next slides, is that this is where your work starts. So this presentation process and looking for a system, you're going to start by going to the websites and taking a look at their videos, but it gets much more in depth. There's multiple presentations involved here, and this is a process that isn't to be rushed. I would say allow at least a couple of months for it. I've heard of organizations taking up to 18 months. I think that's extreme and much too long, but really allow time for that presentation process to be customized. You've done all of this work to determine what your needs are. And I'm moving into my next slide in my notes, but before I do that, quick little graphic on what happens. It's sold to you as the tiger, and we all want the tiger, but we end up getting something completely different. And it just illustrates that it's really difficult when you're trying to design something that you don't understand or that you know little about. It's very difficult to design it with all of the functionality on your own. And that's why I said pick 3 to 5, because this is where your work really starts. Because during that know your software process, you're sharing your information, your business overview and your gap analysis with the salespeople, and they are going to do their best to understand your business, provide a tailored solution, but at the same time, you're rolling your sleeves up and you're doing your best to understand their software, because you do not want to rely on what is presented to you during 1 or 2 or 3 presentations, because they're going to present to you what they think your business needs. And you've been in your business a little longer than the salesperson from another company, and so it's your responsibility to determine what's near and dear to you, to determine what it is your business needs and how that software can deliver it beyond what's presented during a sales process. Hayden, I'm just going to take a breath and allow you to interject, because I know you had something to say.
Yeah, just a thought as you were going through, just thinking about you think about the 18 months of demos. I'm sure you've got some vendors who are involved in that shortlist that are going to get pretty frustrated if that's the way that the process unfolds. And I just wondered, from your perspective, to what extent, and you're in a selections and there's competitive stuff going on here, but to what extent do you have the vendor during this process as actually they're stakeholders in the project as well? How do you keep them engaged enough to invest in your problems but not go so far down that path as to piss them off and qualify them out and have them sort of I guess not engage happily? It's a fine line, and the temptation is to go hard at them, but how do you kind of bring them in and collaborate with them? They've got a lot to add in the process, so I'm just interested from your perspective how you deal with that.
Yeah, and I've had both responses from vendors when I've said, look, I'm looking for a custom presentation that addresses the key issues in the gap analysis that I gave you, and I need you to come to the presentation ready to show me X, Y, and Z and how it can be done vanilla versus having to customize your software. And I've had an MD of a software company call me up and say, we strongly recommend against that because we have a good prepared sales presentation that I think you should hear. Right to, please send me your logo, send me some of your customers, send me some examples of transactions so that we can incorporate that into the gap analysis that you've sent and deliver something that's going to answer your questions. And I've gone through the process with both types of vendors, and what I've found is if the vendor engages at the software selection process, they tend to fully engage throughout the process and provide a better solution. In the end, we didn't get what we needed from the vendor that said, look, I've got a set presentation that I think works, because it didn't address all of the issues. And that's where you really have to be proactive. You have to ask for examples. I go beyond that and I say, great, get me a catalog of how your software works, get me some data sheets that tell me how each module works, because it is my job for the company that I am with at the time to not accept what I see, but to drill in further And one example that I had when I was looking at the software for this one company, it was really, really important. Market researchers want to know everything. To be able to customize reports for individuals, not to have to call up some programmer and say, can you please design X report for me, but to do it in more of a saved search function. And during the presentation, balance sheet was brought up, P&L was brought up, and I said, great, add a gross margin under the GP dollars. And they said, well, no, we can't do that. That's when you'd call up our support team, you'd pay for some support hours, and they'll get back to you in a day or two with some changes to the report. And that just was not what we were looking for. So I tend to favor the companies that are going to be more involved.
Yeah, I guess it's a matter of pushing through the frontline salesperson and getting their depth of product and technical knowledge in to support the process. So you're seeing true capability rather than a sales presentation of capability.
Yeah, and that's why I say you have to allow sufficient time for the process, because it's a learning curve for both sides.
Okay, great.
So planning for future needs. This is back to that first slide when I said, consider the scalability of the package. Is it going to fit your company in 3 years and in 5 years' time? And what's the additional depth and functionality that you're going to need? And if you're looking at a core package, what other modules does it have that are fully integrated on the same platform that you can add on to extend your functionality? Because you don't want to be going through this in 2 or 3 years' time where you've outgrown your system again. And there's so much functionality if you make use of a system, fully make use of it, that your company could experience 30 or 40% growth. One company I'm working with right now is on track this year for 48% growth after having implemented software 2 years ago. They've grown almost 50% year on year. And thankfully, they've picked a software that will grow with them. You also have to take a look at whether you're up for phased implementation or if you're going to go all out. So if you're implementing an ERP CRM, that's a big undertaking. You may want to wait to do e-commerce. But when you do that, you need to plan today to consider for the whole project so you don't paint yourself into a corner. But you also have to consider the time and resources that you've got and impact on your business that it's going to have, and that you don't bite off more than you can chew, because a lot of people are involved. It's a business transformation, and if you try to transform absolutely every part of the business, that may backfire. So that's where phased implementation can come in, and you work with your vendors to timeline that and to determine what resources you need. And the cost of rework, this is, I had a slide in there somewhere that said time spent planning is never wasted. And it really is, because the cost of rework, if anyone's taken a PMI or Prince course, is estimated at about 10 times the cost after go live than it is at the planning stages. And I always advocate that time up front in selection, but also that time after selection in doing the planning should be at least a third of your project time, to ensure that you are incorporating that feedback that's in your gap analysis from all your functional managers and involve them in the planning. I mean, there's nothing more insulting than asking for someone's feedback up front and then going ahead, choosing the system without involving them or without giving them a say, without giving the people who provided the feedback for your gap analysis an opportunity to view the systems that are being presented, because they're going to pick up things that you may not pick up as an accountant or an IT person or a consultant or whatever role that you're in. Everybody's got something to offer. And I think I'll just leave it at that, conscious of time that we're already at the 40-minute mark. So understanding all of the costs, I've listed a number of the costs here, but some of the points that I want to make are that you really need to compare apples with apples. You need to make sure that, like a lot of companies, they'll come in and there's time and materials, but you could get a fixed price. But if you're looking at time and materials, you think, wow, System A is significantly less than System B because it's only going to take them 200 hours to put it in, whereas Company B has quoted me, 180 days, which is more than 200 hours. if you're comparing like systems, always budget a like time. Go in and rework your spreadsheet, change that 200 hours or that 180 days so you are comparing like time with like time, because I guarantee you one might be underquoted, and that if you are putting in two systems that are similar, budget the same time. There's a couple of value adds here, and that is the value of in-house expertise. It's a significant way to reduce your risk, because if you've got someone who knows the software in-house, who's implemented it before, there will be significantly less risk of rework. They're going to be able to suggest solutions that someone who is learning the software may not be able to select. The value of training is also big. I think there's 3 points where you have to consider your training and incorporate that into the cost, and that is upfront training, so that the people working on the system within your company have an idea of the functionality before they start answering process questions and planning the design. It's very difficult to plan if you don't understand how the system works. Hands-on training, get involved during the implementation, learn the system through either designing, testing, and then there's end-user training, which is obviously that training that is done just before go live. And a lot of people focus on that and forget about the first two training opportunities. Their sandboxes can cost roughly about 20% of the cost of the modules, but I will tell you this is one of the biggest value adds and something you should incorporate into your cost of the system, because it is invaluable to be able to test your transactions in a separate environment. And that's pre-go live and for a period of time after go live. So just be aware that there are a lot of different costs, but when you compare them, ask for that cost breakdown and suggest that you want your costs delivered to you in the quote in a manner that you can compare. And if it isn't, go back and say, look, I need you to break down your implementation cost into days so that you can compare and make sure that each software provider is providing you similar time or similar data warehouse and usage fees if they're separate, etc. Second to last point, go beyond the sales team. I think the worst reason I ever heard for not taking a really good look at a software option and bringing it to final presentation was, well, I didn't like the salesperson. And Hayden, I think you said yesterday, that's more common than you might think.
Yeah, the cultural fit, it really is important. I mean, you're going to be spending a lot of time with these vendors and their consulting teams. It is really important to get that fit right and be comfortable with one another and have spent some decent time together during the assessment phase, evaluation phase. I think that really is probably underrated, but is very important.
Yeah, and my point is that fit is not with the salesperson. They might be the first face you see, but go beyond that. Once you're considering in your final phases of reviewing a software, make sure that fit extends to the implementation team.
Yeah, did right.
And I strongly advocate references, how the software has performed in like businesses, what implementation issues did that business have, how did the implementation team perform during that implementation, and you can pick your implementation team. I had a company that I work with recently switch. They were dealing with a partner of a software provider, and the fit just wasn't there. And I contacted the software provider and said, we need to work with another partner. No offense to the first guys, but what they were proposing was to basically deliver a product and then provide ongoing support of 2 days a week for the next year. And what this company needed was a partner that would allow them to be more involved and collaborate with them, take a little more time, but at the end of the process and go live, they would be able to stand on their own 2 feet. So really, really take the time to assess this, because you're going to be working with these people for quite some time.
Just a point there on your references, Vittoria. I mean, I think that's really vital. Hearing it from the horse's mouth of people that have been through the process is nothing more valuable. But what point in the time in the evaluation phase, do you do that? Are you early in your shortlisting? A lot of people just treat that as a kind of due diligence checklist at the end. Yes, we went and talked to some of their clients, but I think it's more important than that. What's your view?
I think when you're down to 2 or 3, I wouldn't do it at the beginning when you're looking at maybe 3 to 5. But when you've got down to your second round of presentations, or when you're really strongly considering a system, and well before you make that decision, start talking to the salespeople about the implementation teams, meet them, find out what their implementation style is, because that could be the difference of taking it to the next level.
Yeah, and make it a conscious phase in your evaluation processes to go and do those site visits and be quite deliberate about getting contact time with other clients.
And in this last slide where I'm saying dedicate your necessary time and resources, there's huge value in having that project management and someone with software knowledge, but there's also huge value in conquering your fears. The best way to reduce risk and get the most out of a system is to understand it. This is not rocket science. Everyone starts somewhere. We're not born experts, and people want to be asked to help you. So ask, and even once selected, keep working to understand that functionality. There's a huge learning curve when you go through that business process and your business requirements document that sets the stage for the implementation. Just keep learning and keep pushing yourself to understand the software. If there's one message I have to deliver, it's that. And the final point, delegate. Don't try to do it all. There's always going to be someone with more knowledge in some functional area than you have. Leverage it. And with that, I'm ready for questions.
Okay, fantastic. I have probably done a poor job of my time management, Vittoria, but we've at least got a little over about 15 minutes to address some questions, and there has been some good ones come in, both in the registration process. Thank you for those that raised questions during that, and I'll get to those. I guess there's a question, one from Bevan, and I thought was interesting, was the degree to which you look at verticalized solutions versus broad solutions, and to what extent you should take the norms that are going on in your industry, and I suppose you get some long-term established applications that have a predominant position within an industry versus opening up your sort of head above that and saying, hang on, there's a broader set of solutions out there that can probably deliver us a wider set of capabilities. How do you make a decision between one versus the other?
That's funny, because I was having a similar conversation with a friend of mine this morning, and they just went with the system because it had 52% of the market. And the pros of doing that are it's very easy to hire people who have had some system experience, both at your end user interface. Like they run daycare centers and have 60 of them around Australia, but it's very easy to hire daycare workers who will know this system and be able to use it right off the bat. It's very easy to find in-house expertise. By choosing the same system as everybody else, though, you're not going to have any competitive advantage versus going with something that might have better functionality.
Yeah, I guess that boils back down to understanding your business, where your pain points are and what your requirements are in the new system, and going through a thorough process. I guess being a little bit open-minded as well as, that competitive advantage. Do you want to be the same as all your competitors? Maybe not. Yeah. Now, okay, one that got raised, and I thought it sort of jumped out at me in the registration process. And sorry, I haven't got the name of who raised it. I did, printout didn't cover it. But as a non-IT person, how do you trust IT people to provide the best trade-off between cost and performance? I think that's a common issue. You get into these projects, and the world of IT takes over, and normal everyday business people that have their day jobs kind of get a little bit lost in the jargon and terminology. How do you sort of navigate your way through that trust issue?
My response to that is the same as my response to any decision, any life decision that is that important to me. I'm not going to trust it to anyone else. I certainly would leverage the knowledge that IT people have, but I would make it a joint decision. I would make it my business to know why that decision is being made and not leave it entirely up to someone else.
Yeah, and also if you're struggling, I guess is pull in the experts and get confidence yourself that you've got the right people who are addressing those concerns. Okay, another good one and this is directly on the nail. As an accountant, Vittoria, what expectations do you have around the return on an investment that a system should provide?
This may surprise you, but I've never quantified return on investment for a system as 1 year or 2 years, because I look at it from a completely different perspective, even though I am an accountant, is that return on investment to me says, well, here's my cost outlay and how long is it going to take to recoup it, versus here are the opportunities that a system can create. And it's much harder to measure the return on investment when the system is touching so many areas of your business. Yes, you can measure it by increased sales, and how much can you attribute to the system? Well, unknown. But you also measure the success of the system based on how your users like it. If they don't like it and there's turnover and you haven't done a good job, you can't foresee that you're going to have a lot of turnover in your business because you did a poor job of implementing. So there's so many factors here that make it difficult to assess the return on investment. So I take a look at this from what opportunities am I going to create, and I make every effort to realize those opportunities, be they in the ERP, sales, marketing, HR, or whatever modules that we are purchasing, demand planning, or procurement.
Okay, great. Look, I'll rattle through these questions just so I get some coverage, because I'm not going to be able to cover them all. There's a few questions coming in just on the integration point, and I guess if I can summarize those, it's to what extent does integration between systems versus evaluation of new systems, what percentage of resource and time and energy should be put into the integration aspect versus the new selection? And I guess we're talking here where integration is going to be part of the project. How much time does it take? What percentage of effort is kind of typical for that integration piece?
So that it's sometimes difficult to know how much time it will take to integrate, but some great questions to ask up front are, please present a joint presentation. So get an expert in from the software you already have, or if you're looking at two systems because there wasn't one solution out there that could cover everything, have them do a joint presentation, or ask, have you worked with, like if you've got a system in-house and you're considering another system, say, has anyone else implemented and maintained this separate system? Because a lot of systems have working relationships that extend back 2, 3, 5 years, and there's a high degree of integration. And if you are going to integrate, I would certainly make that part of the selection process to ensure that the persons presenting the software that you are considering present in conjunction with an expert for the software you already have.
Okay, yeah, okay, great, good answer. Okay, another one, this is an interesting one, and it's focused on where the salespeople is engaging with the organisation, and they're building relationships often above the project teams sort of day to day. They're up in the ear of the senior general managers and CEOs, and the question is how do you avoid that skewing the outcome from the evaluation process? There's some cultural matchups, we've talked about that, but I guess there is an element where somehow the decision's already been made, but the evaluation team is still pressing on through the hardship that they're going on, but hey, the decision's already been made. How do you watch out for that? What are the signs, and what can you do about it?
I think that's a really tough one to address, because sometimes those agendas are kept hidden and it's not immediately apparent. But I think a great way to combat that is to go through that selection process, engage both the senior people and the functional aspects. Write down your criteria, put it in that document, be it the business case or my preference, that business overview and gap analysis. It's going to be pretty hard to have a pre-selected product and match that up against a gap analysis where that product doesn't meet the requirements. It'll become very apparent and very difficult to justify something that doesn't fit if they've got a preconceived idea of what they want. I mean, it could be that pre-selection does fit, and then fantastic. But if it doesn't, you've got a lot of substantiation for why it won't if you go through the process.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, question from Riaz. Unfortunately, he's just left, so he's not going to hear the answer, but we'll come back to him. And we did touch on it, but it's a little bit of how much of your selection should be based on the knowledge that the consultants you're engaging with have with your industry. To what extent should you be drilling into their individual CVs and seeing what experience they've got in the industry that you're in?
I think that knowledge is invaluable. Implementation teams within companies in the mid-tier level, I've just noticed a lot of people signed up are in the mid-tier level, so I'll address it from there. They'll have teams that have worked in specific industries, and that's where getting to know your implementation team is a huge value. If you're in the out of the box, the software being developed tends to be industry specific for starters in a lot of cases, or has functionality developed for an industry.
Yeah, so it's really a matter of sniffing that out and seeking the individuals who have a bit of depth of knowledge within your industry. I agree. It's you just can't go past knowing how industries operate. Look, that's coming up to the top of the hour. Vittoria, thank you very much for your contribution. My apologies to those in the audience whose questions I haven't had time to address. I'll just grab the screen back quickly so we can just wrap things up. I know there are questions that have been raised that were specifically, one-on-one. Those will be dealt with. We'll come back to you on email specifically. Thanks for those from everyone. So just very quickly, thanks for joining. We already did the Q&A. Just as you exit the webinar today, popping up in another window will be a survey just from today's session to give us some feedback, but also NetSuite have put up they've got a Frost & Sullivan paper on there around disruption and transformation. Which I'm sure is top of mind if you are going through this selection process, the impacts on your business. Oh, so I see a spelling mistake within there as well. And so you can just opt in to receive that. They'll send that through to you, or if you want to talk specifically with NetSuite, then they are more than willing to get in touch. As I've said, NetSuite sponsored the event today, and are very much in the cloud space. They were built and bred on the internet and have been built as native run on website and software as service, web browser and mobile capability. So they are particularly strong in the e-commerce, retail, distribution and service business area, and all within a single platform. So CRM, ERP, e-commerce, all of those modules integrated together on the single database, as we talked about. A lot of benefits in that. If you're interested in NetSuite, then just jump onto their website, netsuite.com.au, and check them out. Okay, so that's a wrap. There's contact details there if you do want to get in touch with Vittoria. She's happy to engage one-on-one. She's updated her LinkedIn profile as well, I gather. Sorry, Vittoria, I didn't put it up there. Thank you very much for your presentation today. Lots of good comments and things coming in from the audience, so I hope they found it valuable. And that will be a wrap. Keep an eye on the newsletter for our next events coming up. Thanks very much, Vittoria, and thanks to the audience.
Well, thank you all for listening, and thank you for having me as a speaker.
Okay, we'll wrap that up. Thanks, everyone. Cheers, bye.